inviting you to reflect on some of the developments coming out of the G20 Summit with international relations expert Dr. Kingsley Makhubela. Dr. Makhubela, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks very much, Newzroom.
So, I mean, there have been resolutions made and some suggestions, in fact, on peace and stability in regions including Sudan, Ukraine, and the DRC. How do you view the inclusion of African conflicts, such as those in the DRC and Sudan? Do you view this as a victory at all for South Africa and especially the Global South?
Newzroom, if you allow me, let me just explain something that it's just becoming a problematic in terms of the explanation what it is. This question around consensus. Now, consensus in theory, it means a synthesis of everyone's idea. And it also refers to the best contribution of everyone into the decision. It's a group decision-making that it's not made on the basis of a vote. Now, South Africa spoke about sufficient consensus, which sometimes it's referred to as qualified consensus. This is when you have a group decision-making and one member does not entirely agree with the content of whatever decision ought to be made, but is willing to stand aside not to obstruct decision-making. I suppose that's what happened yesterday. Even though Argentina has reservation, it has opted not to stand in the way of the decision-making. That's why the presidency referred to the sufficient consensus. There is complete consensus when everyone has agreed. There's also another element, it's called lukewarm consensus. It's when actually the majority agreed to accept the decision of the minority and not to stand in the way of adopting this decision. So that's the whole thing about these questions of consensus and so on. But what I feel is a bit unfortunate sometimes, it's South Africa hopping on this thing of protocol. States are all equal. And whoever represents a state at a particular forum, it's a decision of that state. What South Africa has done is fantastic, to go and hand over this thing at DECO. But South Africa should stay away from saying this is a protocol procedure because there are no rules engagement that exist within the G20. And because the Americans have downgraded this, South Africa should have just downgraded this without saying anything. Now, you see the headlines that South Africa barred the United States from attending the closing ceremony, which is not correct. And I'm afraid South Africa is unable to communicate this. The American presence at the closing ceremony was for the purpose of a handover. Now that the handover is happening at DECO, there's no need for them to be there because they've explained their purpose. They were not barred. It's because the event has been moved somewhere else. So that's what is going on. And you don't get that communication coming from government officials. Of course, South Africa is still the presidency of the G8, of the G20 till the end of the month. The United States takes over on the 1st of December. Even tomorrow, South Africa will still remain the president. So you have a transitional arrangement till the 1st of December when the other one takes over. And within that period, South Africa can do a handover. I've heard GCIS starting to refer to South Africa as former president. It's incorrect. Until the handover has been done. South Africa remained a transitional president at that time, but remains a de facto president until the handover is done. So I thought those things ought to be clearly communicated so that everyone understands what's happening.
Sure.
Sorry for digressing a bit.
No, I think those are important points that you're raising there, Dr. Makhubela. I want us to hone in on the issue of consensus. Are you then suggesting that this overwhelming consensus that has been touted by the president is a farce? Are you saying that, in fact, there wasn't consensus and that some nations just let it pass through, let these resolutions pass through because they do not want to make too much of a noise?
No, the presidency has said there's sufficient consensus, which is correct. It's part of the rules in terms of decision-making consensus. So The fact that it's a consensus, Nompumelelo, it doesn't mean that everyone agrees with the content of the document. But people have agreed that they would adopt this, even though they may have reservation in certain aspect of the document. That's what consensus is all about. But they would not prevent the adoption of this document because they have one or two issues that they are opposed to. So you have sufficient consensus. It's correct to say that.
I suppose then the declaration also not necessarily condemning Russia for its war in Ukraine, but calling rather for peace based on the UN Charter is also getting a consensus on this, despite tensions that may be present with some of the other nations.
You know, I'm still in the process of making sense of the declaration. I've gone through it 3 times, I think, now. But if you look at the declaration, it's where it speaks about in any decision making of this kind of meetings. It looks at where it affirms, it looks where it notes, it looks where it reiterates. So those terms, they totally mean something different. And then if you look at this, they're all contained in the document. With respect to conflict area, the declaration has taken a very it's an indicative of consensus because it doesn't condemn anywhere, even in terms of the conflict in the Sudan that is referring to. It's not condemning anyone. It speaks generally about conflict and how to resolve conflict and how to resolve conflict within the framework of the United Nations Charter and how to operate. I mean, it makes references to countries should not expropriate territories of other countries and so on within the UN Charter. You can tell who it's referring to, but that's a language that already exists within the UN Charter that anyone else would not oppose to it. So it has taken a very convenient and rightfully so, a position that accommodates everyone. It's not a new thing. It comes from the daily language in terms the daily host in terms of this kind of language. So you're going to find that very consistent moving forward, that the language accommodates everyone, but where there's a need to raise issues of international law, like in this case, I think one paragraph speaks about the international law, that everything must be done within the international law, within humanitarian law. It even makes reference that food should not be used as a weapon of warfare, without mentioning exactly who it is referring to. Sitting here, I assume it's referring to Israel, but they couldn't use that in the language in drafting this consensus. They had to use a language that is consistent with international law, with the terminologies that has been accepted already in other fora.
And do you think that the use then of that language that is, I suppose, entrenched in the UN Charter and international law does kind of put South Africa in a non-aligned position diplomatically?
No, not at all. It's actually a language that is used by every country. The respect for international law and the rule-based international law is a language that you find across the board that people are using. Reference to the UN Charter is not a neutral thing. It's based on decisions that countries have made commitment to respect and uphold the UN Charter. It has nothing to do with South Africa. It's a general international approach to this kind of conferences that sometimes is quite convenient to take exact paragraph as stated in some of the documents of international law and lift them up into the agreement because they build consensus around those documents. There's no country that can stand up and say, well, we are now opposed to the UN Charter. How can they do that when they are part of this kind of an organization? So you use a language that has already been accepted to amplify what you need to communicate.
Sure. Dr. Kingsley Makhubela, thank you very much for your insights this morning. That was international relations expert, Dr. Kingsley Makhubela.